Okay. Good morning and afternoon, folks. We'll get started in a minute when we kind of see participants leveling off. Thanks for joining us on this lovely Friday afternoon or Saturday morning, depending where you are.
I think it's maybe ready to start. Do you think, Laura? Are you seeing more people coming in?
I am not.
Great.
Get going.
All right, I'll get us started. So welcome everyone to the August meeting of the Equal Access Book Club. When the Guide to Assisting Students with Disabilities, Equal Access in Health Science and Professional Education was published in 2015, it filled a gap for those of us involved in health science, education, and students with disabilities. And since then, much more has been written and learned. So we're really excited to bring you this book club that reviews the second edition. Sorry, just dealing with my Zoom here. So before we get started, let's introduce ourselves. I'll start and then I'll pass it over to you, Laura. So kia ora koutou, hello everyone. I'm Neera Jain and I'm tuning in today from the Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei Rohe here in Tamaki Makaurau, Aotearoa, also known as Auckland, New Zealand, where I gratefully live and work. And it's bright and early here, Saturday morning on day 4 of a new lockdown. So I'm really thrilled to have the opportunity to speak to all of you today while I'm here at home. And I'm currently a postdoctoral fellow in critical studies and education and a lecturer in medical humanities at the University of Auckland. I'm also a board member at large for the Coalition for Disability Access in Health Science Education. And I was an editor of the first and second editions of the book. So delighted to join this initiative that Lisa and others have organized. So I'll turn it over to you, Laura.
All right. Hi, Chika. Thank you. I raise my hands to you all. Thank you for being together with us today. My name is Laura Yvonne Bulk. I go by she and her, and my access needs are currently being met, but if you post things in the chat, it might visually take me a bit to find them. And I am grateful to be on the traditional unceded and ancestral territory of the Musqueam people today in what is now known as Vancouver on Turtle Island. And I'm going to put a link in the chat so that if you would like to learn more about the lands that you are on and your relationship with them, you'll be able to go to native-land.ca, which does cover a lot of the globe and learn a little bit more. And as we get started, I'm going to read one of the calls to action that came out of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission here in what's now called Canada. And this was meant to address and redress some of the oppression directed toward the Indigenous people of this land. And I think there's a lot of power in the solidarity that we can have with Indigenous folks and disabled folks / folks with disabilities. So call to action number 24 says we call upon medical and nursing schools in Canada to require all students to take a course dealing with Aboriginal health issues, including the history and legacy of residential schools, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, treaties and Aboriginal rights, and Indigenous teachings and practices. And this will require skills-based training in intercultural competency, conflict resolution, human rights, and anti-racism. And I think that's also something we would love to call schools, health, sciences, education programs to require education around disability, cultural safety, and so on, and anti-ableism. So I stand in solidarity with that call to action as well. And I am an accessibility advisor. We will use the term DRP, disability resources professional, throughout our conversation, but my title is accessibility advisor. And I work specifically with students across 14 healthcare programs on Musqueam territory at the University of British Columbia. I also identify as a disabled occupational therapist and have been very grateful to be doing work in this area for a while in research and advocacy as well. On the next slide, Neera is the driver today. We have a little bit more information about the chapter itself. So today we're discussing some of the content from chapter 8, Professionalism and Communication, about disabilities and accommodations. So the authors are Lisa Meeks and Neera Jain, and we also have contributions in there from Shelby Actison, Allison May, Christine Lowe, and Erin Fair, and we are grateful to them. On the next slide, so this second edition of the book, Equal Access for Students with Disabilities, wouldn't exist without the fantastic efforts of the editors, Lisa Meeks, Neera Jain, and Elisa Laird, who's also here with us today. And there are many others who contributed to the book. And we are very grateful to all the authors who are listed on the slide right now, and who you can also find listed in other places. I'm going to pass it along to Neera to talk about our sponsors.
Thanks, Laura. The Equal Access Book Club would not exist without the support of several key groups. AHEAD, the Association on Higher Education and Disability. Their assistance with the Zoom platform is invaluable. As well, the Coalition on Disability Access and Health Science Education, designated interpreters who are providing our captioning today, and of course, Springer Publishing. We're so grateful that these organizations have supported this initiative. So just some guidelines for today's book club discussion. As moderators, we'll pose some questions based on the 8th chapter of the book and facilitate a discussion among all of you. We ask that, of course, you please be civil and respectful, encourage everyone's participation, and support each other as we navigate multiple perspectives in order to learn from one another and grow as a community. Now, the best way to engage in the discussion on Zoom is by using the raise hand function. If you do that, we can then call on you and unmute you to speak. If you don't want to raise your hand, another option is to post a comment in the chat. And I just want to flag, and you can also send questions to Laura and I in the Q&A feature. So there's 3 ways: raise your hand, you can use the chat, or the Q&A box. So we'd love to hear from as many of you as are comfortable joining in and sharing your thoughts, experience, and wisdom. Everyone who actively participates in this meeting by posing a question or comment will be entered in a drawing for the free book after the session. So please do participate. And before we get started, I just want to flag that Laura and I have taken some liberties with the questions today. If you're following along with the preset questions for this chapter, you'll notice that we've retained the essence of those questions while making them a little bit more open-ended to prompt discussion. We've also prioritized some questions that we think are really critical in the interests of time. So with that said, we can take it away, Laura. I'll just get the next slide up.
So today, as you've gathered, we are discussing professionalism and some of the reasons professionalism is so important in most health science programs and often is a core competency, and how professional communication relates to professionalism overall. So a few things to keep in mind. So professionalism, professional behavior is commensurate with the trust that is bestowed on health professionals. It is really critical to relationships, both with patients or clients and other healthcare team members. And it needs to be based on respect and integrity and responsiveness to others' needs. And ongoing or egregious breaches of professionalism are independent grounds for dismissal without holding a degree or withholding a degree. So there are some cases in the book that you can refer to as well. And how we communicate is really a reflection of professionalism. So all our communication, including that about disability and accommodations and access needs, should proceed in a professional manner. And so we will be talking a bit about things like disability disclosure today as well in relation to that. So on the next slide. All right, so it's really important, vital, that expectations for students with respect to professionalism are defined clearly. So we are curious and would be excited to hear from folks about a few things. So how does your institution evaluate professional behavior to ensure equitable assessment of all students? How are the expectations communicated to students? And how or do students know what this air quotes professionalism is? So a few questions, but basically, how do people know what the expectations are around professionalism? How is it communicated? And how is it assessed at your institutions that you know of? And you can jump in the chat or raise your hand.
Okay, I think we have a raised hand. I'm just looking to see. Let's see, I've just allowed you to talk, Marie. Join in, maybe say your name and where you're calling from.
Hi, my name is Marie. I am with Rush University Medical Center in Chicago, and I'm currently driving in my car.
Thanks for joining us, Marie.
Absolutely. I love to end the week with this great group of individuals. So thank you guys for both hosting. At Rush, we have 4 different colleges: nursing, medicine, health sciences, and graduate college, and they each have different language in regards to professionalism listed in the student handbook, code of conduct, and in all the syllabi. And it's kind of glazed over, in my opinion, because when I intake a student, I ask them, what do you know of your professionalism clause? Like, what do you remember from your orientation, from your student handbook? Depends on when they get them as a new student. And they draw a blank. So to me, that shows that there really isn't, and again, it's not 100% across the board. It's just, there's not much of a explanation on how to be professional versus more of a, we can grade you down for unprofessional behavior. And I actually sat in on a promotions committee meeting with one of the colleges, and a student did pose the question, you graded me down for professionalism, but when I asked how to be professional, I was told, well, you're already in college medical school, you should know already. So when we hear responses like that, what are we teaching them? So I think we're still a little bit gray in that area. So when I work with my students, I inform them, okay, well, let's pull up that language and let's go through that and how that may affect you. And then how do we turn this into, how do you communicate about your disability with your relevant faculty, staff, or clinical staff? And I wonder if anyone else has the same experiences as I do. Thanks for listening.
Thanks for jumping in. Yeah, this idea that people are just expected to already know that kind of hidden knowledge that, oh, people that assumption that if you're at this place, you know what that is definitely something I've encountered.
Yeah, I'd agree. And I think Marie's point about actively working on that with students, with asking them is super important, because I do think that experience that she's had is quite common.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder, oh, sorry.
We had another hand raised, but it just disappeared. So I'm wondering if that person changed their mind, or if they, there we go. I'm just going to unmute you. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Lisa Zico from the University of Florida. And to Marie's point, I would share some of those same sentiments in discussions where students will follow up and express concern about being marked off for professionalism and the like. And I'll usually encourage them, well, where is the document, or where are the written expectations that would give you insight into what those behaviors are that are expected of you? And I'm usually met with, silence, or I'm not sure. If I have the wherewithal, or we have the time, I usually try to Google their college, their program, what does it say about professionalism expectations and technical standards, if you will. Typically will fall under their technical standards as well. But it becomes, I'm distressed at the fact that students are not, when I ask them, well, are you familiar with the technical standards? And for whatever reasons, they're not. They're published, they're on websites, they're given to them, but it's not an immediate sort of impact for them. So it kind of falls underneath the radar. But I would agree that this is an area that could use, like many, more attention from us as disability professionals, to kind of push that a little bit with the respective colleges that we're working with.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa, for sharing. And it's definitely can be an issue, I think, for all students, this lack of knowledge, I'm not really sure what this professionalism thing is. I have worked with students who do not necessarily identify as having a disability. And there are perhaps some additional nuances for folks who have access needs that differ from the norm, or who identify as a disabled person or person with a disability. And I think maybe we can go on to the next slide, and Neera is going to ask a question.
Great. So I think what we've kind of established is that professionalism is not necessarily something that students have a really active knowledge about, and that programs are really making visible and clear and alive, I think is the term that came to my mind for students. So we make the point in the chapter that standards of professionalism extend to the ways students engage in accommodation procedures. So we're curious, how have you worked with students around communicating professionally with faculty and supervisors about their accommodations? Anyone have thoughts about that? Nope, we've got. Can go ahead.
Hi, it's Marie again, driving still. It's something I know I've changed over the last 3 years, once I really kind of got a better feel for the different levels of just what the colleges were expecting of our students, and speaking to them and getting to know my institution. institution and how best to communicate across the different areas. It's not just one teacher, right? There's usually multiple clinical faculty assigned to one class because it's a didactic, then there's a lab, then there's a preceptor, then there's a resident or fellow. There's multiple people involved. So I know when I start with a student and we determine that accommodation, then it's okay. Now let's think of logistics. Who do we need to disclose this to, and how do you communicate that within that setting? For our students who have weekly leave from their clerkship, let's say for therapy, it's an approved accommodation, but they're like, okay, but then how do I like tell them or reminding them that I'm leaving? I don't want to just like disappear. So we do. I say, okay, well, here's some language you would use. Now let's do a quick role play. How would you approach me? Say your appointment's weekly on Wednesday. You tell them on Monday quickly. I'm just reminding you, I have my appointment on Wednesday. I'll be leaving short, at this time. Wednesday comes, a quick reminder to the appropriate supervisors. So to me, I think we as DRPs really have to stand back and say, okay, we have the language. Now we know what we want to communicate. Now who do we communicate to, and how do they understand this communication? Because that's a whole other nuance. Someone like our clinical staff, they're not all university staff. So if I send them an email, they may not open it and they may not recognize my name or what I do or why this office is. So I link up with my clinical faculty and say, hey, I need you to help me bridge this introduction, introduce this accommodation, and I'm going to be telling them exactly what the student is going to be communicating to them so they understand what the student is saying to them and under what context. Because we know when the students are in that clinical setting, they're not going to remember everything that the preceptors, the residents, fellows. So giving the students, okay, now here's what you say when you remind them. And if they look at you as if you just said, I'm going to Mars tomorrow on a plane, you can remind them, oh, I've received a communication from the accessibility office, and I'm just reminding you of my weekly appointment. I'll be leaving at this time. I'll report back to the unit at this time. So to me, it was really just finding out how to communicate best with the different areas within my institution. And it's been working out. It's been a lot better in this past 2 years, especially with COVID and not being on campus for over a year, having to rely solely on emails and calls with no face-to-face interaction. I hope I haven't rambled on.
That's okay. So I think, Marie, you brought up a number of really good points there, both kind of the logistics as well as, the realities of clinical environments and the need for ongoing reminders as the need arises, that students kind of anticipate the need for ongoing reminders. So you mentioned a couple of strategies that you use, role playing, working out who needs to understand and how they understand, and then that work as the DRP of bridging introductions. So I think all of those are really great points. And I wonder if there's anyone else who has any other strategies in the ways that they've worked with students. Laura, are there things that you've done? Oh, wait, we've got someone ready to talk.
Hi, Neera Jain.
Hi, Lisa.
It's a pleasure to watch both of you present. I was just thinking, just a quick idea. I want to build on what Marie was saying, because I think in the end there, she brought up a very important point, which is in COVID, you have less space time and there's a lack of ability to kind of contextualize things through visual cues, body language. And so that written communication becomes even more important. And so one of the things that I used to do with some of my more apprehensive learners was to allow them to write out a communication and send it to me for feedback. And then we would role play kind of, what occurs if the response is X, what occurs if the response is Y, how would you respond to that? Granted, I had a lot of time that was afforded me through UCSF, but I do think that time spent on the front end pays off in dividends on the back end. So I want to encourage you to do that, especially since this is our only source of communication for many students. So just modeling, providing feedback, kind of like a little light-handed editing, and then, creating the scenario and saying, now, how might you respond, especially for learners who are a little bit more anxious? So that's all.
Thanks, Lisa. I think that's a great point. And the point that I wanted to bring up when I was thinking about this was also, I think, and it dovetails with what you've said, Lisa, is about talking through, and I've said worst case scenarios, but maybe a better term is complexities. So similar to what Lisa's talking about, what would you say if a faculty member responded XYZ ways? But also just planning out what might happen in your life and how you might be prepared to respond to that. So if I'm working with a student with a chronic health condition, we want to be talking about what happens when a flare occurs. So identifying what the expected process is, so a student knows in advance. So when they're in kind of more of a crisis situation or a pinch point where they can draw upon a process that's already been outlined of they know who they need to contact. If they need to contact someone, do they need to get more documentation or not? And we kind of work through those things in advance so that the student is then prepared to act in a professional manner and communicate in a professional manner about that. And I just see in the chat, Terry Edwards has shared a comment, helping students with timing of communication is often needed. Students will often overlook the importance of giving faculty time to confirm accommodations are in place or getting accommodations in place if they have been overlooked or forgotten. And I think that's a really great point, that the timeline should be made really clear with students. And that's something I know I've done before, is to really think through who needs to know by when and how. Laura, do you have any thoughts about that?
About the timing?
About anything about this?
Yes, so definitely the idea of practicing with a student, with a learner, is something that learners have told me was really helpful, and also encourage learners to practice themselves in front of the mirror with a loved one, thinking about how will I respond if this scenario happens, or what are some spiels that I can have on hand and just be able to pull out. Yeah. Another aspect of communication as well that I've talked with learners about is in your charting. And how in your documentation and charting practices. And that doesn't necessarily relate to disability, is what the first thought is, because documentation is taught to all students and needs to be. But sometimes it does relate in the sense that if a student accesses writing in different ways, that needs to become a conversation. Or if they maybe spelling is a thing for them. And so we had some of those conversations as well that again relate to the communication piece. And I think it's really important as well to think about the whole healthcare team when talking with the students about communication, and thinking about, okay, so it's not just your clinical supervisor or preceptor, but it's also other members of the team. So if there's a scenario in which you feel you need to communicate some of your learning or access needs with someone else on the team, how might you want to do that? And being clear with students, it doesn't have to be, by the way, I'm diagnosed with such and such and blah, blah, blah. But it can just be about your learning needs, for example. So those are some of the strategies that learners have told me are helpful, that I've worked with them around.
Yeah, I think that's so important, because the dynamic clinical space creates new opportunities and new spaces and interactions where you might want to communicate in different kinds of ways and share information in different kinds of ways. So I think that's really, really helpful. Mm-hmm. Why don't we move to the next question, which kind of flips this, this question around. So, you know, it's not just students who need to communicate professionally. Faculty and administrators should certainly be held to similar standards of professionalism and indeed model good professionalism in their behaviors. So I guess we're curious, how have you worked with faculty, administrators, and clinical educators around communicating professionally with students about their disability and accommodations? So any thoughts there from our participants?
I can kick us off a wee bit and just say, you know, I think a lot of the faculty, clinical faculty and educators, a lot of us have not necessarily thought about this as a piece of professionalism. So when we're thinking pedagogically about it, it's important, I think, in my conversations with folks is framing it as, you know, this is part of pedagogy. This is part of our teaching. And these are aspects of the hidden curriculum that you're communicating. And yeah, and disability is included in that. And that communication around accommodations and disability is part of teaching and modeling professionalism. And so that's been an important part of the conversation, and kind of that training around remembering disability is part of this diversity of our student body. And I see something popped up in the chat. So sending articles or evidence around the topic. Yes, this is important to have this constant and ongoing conversation with folks is definitely important. And sending podcasts. I actually discovered that that's a really great strategy. So I encourage folks to do that, because that's an easy thing for faculty, clinical educators, for all of us to potentially pick up. So that's definitely a good strategy.
And I see Terry Edwards says communicating with student progress committee members is also an ongoing need. Mm-hmm. So Terry, I don't know if you're open to speaking, but I'm curious, when you say communicating with student progress committee members, is that something that you do in terms of doing training, or is it about working with them on their communications? Can you say more about that, what the work you do with student progress committees? You can either, I can elevate you to speak, or you can type in the chat. Yep, I'll just unmute you right now. Go ahead.
Right, I think I'm unmuted.
Yep.
I've not done it in a formal manner, but when I know that a student with accommodations is going before the Student Progress Committee, I will generally talk with someone within Student Affairs, like the Dean of Student Affairs, who sits on that committee, and remind them. I don't speak specifically about that student, but I remind them about just general practices that need to be done, that they need to invite the student to talk about how a disability, if there is one, might have contributed to the action, the behaviors, the situation that they're discussing in the Student Progress Committee, and for them to take that information, review it, take it seriously, and then if needed, pause the meeting, put it on hold, and suggest the student come and talk to me.
Great, thanks for that. Yeah, I think that's a really great point, that kind of working with faculty and administrators about referrals is a really big one. Something that we talk about in the book is around how faculty respond if they think someone has a disability, but maybe the student hasn't disclosed yet. So that's something we can talk about later. I'm just going to unmute. We have another contribution. Go ahead.
Thank you, Marie from Chicago again. I know when I do my basic check-in with my faculty, you know, prior to the start of like the academic year, there's always that generic, I shouldn't say generic, but just I give like a very common speech that I would give to everyone to say, okay, now, and if a student uses the following, I had adjustments, accommodations, and IEP, a 504 plan, or one of those terms, then please think of, so it's like that referral process. Like those are keywords that should tag you up, you know, to remind you to engage my office and say, you know, to the student, thank you so much for sharing this information with me. I want to inform you about an office here at the university that's here to support you. So I think that's important for me, for my faculty to understand, because again, within health sciences, I have to remind my faculty, you are not the treating clinician for the student. They are not coming to you for treatment and diagnosis. You are teaching them. That's where you have to stay. So if a student discloses to you, you can't start doing like an HPP on them. You have to really just say, thank you for sharing. Now let me refer you on for the appropriate academic support. And then I remind the faculty that everything that they do in front of the students, be it in the classroom, the lab, the clinical setting, they're modeling for our students. So everything, every behavior, every attitude, the nonverbal, the verbal cues, all of that being observed by our students. And that's really important. So when we're working with individuals with disabilities in the healthcare setting, how they are working with that patient, they're going to model that. So I want to really remind the faculty that there are so many individuals living with invisible disabilities that are not comfortable disclosing, even when they're coming to talk to a physician assistant, nurse practitioner, whatever it may be. And so the students, you know, are just kind of, I'm telling the students behind the scenes about your professionalism, how to communicate appropriately, how to advocate for yourself. But then I'm also informing our faculty on, these are things that you need to be aware of. And you also need to know where you have to tag out to say, okay, as your teacher, this is as far as I go. Now I need to bring in that support. And I think it's kind of hard for some of the faculty. And I have to remind them that they can't ask the questions of, well, why do you have an accommodation? Why are you registered with that office? And I tell the students, if you're ever asked that, please, you know, take a second, take a moment and say, you know what, I appreciate you asking me that question, but I'm going to ask you to follow up with Marie on that, because I tell my students, if you do a knee-jerk reaction to, like, well, that's none of your business, then guess what? That's unprofessional behavior. And that can be used against them. So I just remind them, if a faculty member says this, then follow this path. You know, so I feel like I have to give these little, you know, pathways for faculty and staff, and it works. It's just sometimes I'm surprised I have to say these things to some of my clinical faculty, but that's because they don't work in this day in, day out like the rest of us do. So I have my blinders on to what they do, and they have their day to day as well. So I just think it really just, it's reminding them of these things, and I think they know them. They just seem to sometimes forget. So just wanted to share.
Thanks, Marie. And I think you bring up something that's really critical in this space, which is the power differentials that faculty administrators have. And I think it's, while faculty and administrators might be cognizant of that on some level, I think it's easy to forget how much power they have. And I think something that you said that really resonated with the conversations I've had with students, both as a researcher and as a DSP, DRP, is that students are always gathering information about what's okay, how much is okay, how much is not enough. And so that interaction is so critical, and getting it right is really, really important. So I love the idea of giving different pathways, giving watchwords, giving students kind of things to say when they get it, feel like they're backed in a corner. I think those are all really, really useful. So there was just a comment from Lisa Stico saying, providing resources to program liaisons to share with clinical faculty and course instructors about current disability research, a head website, Docs with Disabilities podcast, and periodic meetings with all medical education program liaisons. And I think this is another model that I think is worth talking about, is that when you have a liaison model, when you have a key contact in each school that supports the DRP in organizing accommodations and communicating with faculty, that can be really useful to have a key person that you're working with to share this information and who's supporting you in disseminating the information further into these different spaces, or organizing trainings can be really useful. So why don't we move to the next question? I'll turn that over to you, Laura.
All right, sounds good. And some of this has, I think, already been identified in our conversation, and we really feel like this is an important and key part of this conversation, is thinking about what barriers students might face as they contemplate whether or not to disclose their disability, or how much, and to whom, and when they're making those disclosure decisions. What are some of the barriers that they might contemplate, and what roles do different players have? So what roles might faculty, disability resource professionals, institutional policies, clinical educators, peers, what roles might all these different people play in removing some of those barriers? So we can talk about what barriers other players might pose, but we're curious what you think the role might be in removing barriers. And training came up. That I think is an important part. Sending those podcasts, the articles, evidence, that's definitely one of the pieces that we can play.
Got someone. Let me just go ahead, Emily.
Hi, I wanted to talk about the roles that others might play in removing those barriers. We recently had a student, I'm with the University of Colorado Anschutz, and we recently had a student who said that they had a peer from the 4th year of the dental school come in and speak about their experience utilizing accommodations and going through that process. And that student really spoke to how that stigma is really there. And that while they were encouraged to reach out to our office, if that other student wouldn't have shared their experience, that they probably wouldn't have reached out. So I think having that peer-to-peer interaction is really helpful, and really helps to remove that stigma for students, to know that somebody else within their own program has really sought out accommodations, and it's been, very helpful in increasing that access for them.
Thanks so much, Emily.
Yeah, definitely removing that isolation and that, oh, it's just me, or does this experience count? Maybe it doesn't. Maybe there's nothing they can do. They won't accommodate this, or kind of some of those negative thought patterns we can get into when we're isolated. So definitely that story sharing is really helpful, and whether it's a peer or a professor, a clinical educator, it can be very powerful.
Yeah, and just kind of jumping off on that, who else might have a role in it? Something I used to do, during orientations, when I was talking to all new students about disability services, I would always say something about, I work with students from every program. We do these kinds of accommodations. For example, I've worked with students in this program before, so I know about XYZ. And I would always, every year get students coming to talk to me and saying, I'm here because I heard you talk at orientation, and I wasn't sure If I should disclose, I'm still not sure, but you said something that really made me think it would be, I could come here and that it was okay. I didn't think there were accommodations in dental school or nursing school, but I see now that maybe I should do this. So I think that role that we can do in signaling that accommodations are possible, that we work with students in the program, is really, really important work to do. Anyone else have comments around barriers and roles in removing barriers to disclosure?
These are all big and important conversations, and we only have 13 minutes left. And I'm sure you want to get in the draw for the book. So just hinting.
Well, if we don't have other comments, should we go on to the next question, Laura?
Yeah, great
Okay.
idea.
Okay. So we've kind of touched on some of these things, but I guess sometimes it's helpful to think about approaches that have been helpful or unhelpful that students have taken when disclosing disability to faculty or clinical educators. And similarly, are there helpful or unhelpful faculty responses? So do we have stories or models of things that have worked or haven't worked so well on either side of this equation? Whoop.
Well, a thread I would love to pick up on that came up a bit earlier was the conversation about timing. And so yes, if I want to get, for example, accommodations on my OSCE, my objective standardized clinical examination, I do need to let someone know enough in advance so that they logistically can organize it. And if I don't, they can try, but I might have to delay writing that or doing that exam. And there are different ways that the administrators and faculty can respond to that timing piece. They can respond in various ways, showing that it's too late. Like, why did you wait? Like, oh, come on, and they won't necessarily say that. However, our demeanor and these kinds of things can really communicate that you are being a problem because you didn't communicate early enough. Or we can thank someone for sharing that and say we will do our best. However, it might be that you'll need to delay doing this exam so that you're able to do it in an equitable manner. So that's one thread I wanted to pick up on from our conversation.
Yeah, I think that's so important, Laura. The timing thing often comes up with faculty and administrators, that frustration. And I think this turns back to the last question about barriers, is that I can't even count how many times I had a conversation with someone who was really frustrated to get a late notification from students. And I just always try to have the conversation to really unpack why that might be. Like, it might be that the student's not organized, but there's also a lot going on in the background that we need to take into consideration that might be happening for the student. And also that we ought not just say no because it's difficult for us logistically, but as you've suggested, Laura, really thinking about, okay, let's take a measured response and thank the student and let's see what can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder, does anyone else, if not, we can go maybe to the last, make the next one our last one.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. So I'll just pop ahead here to, oh,
No, is it this one? No. Yes, this one. Is that what you're thinking of, Laura?
Yes.
Working, yes.
That's exactly. All right. So we are thinking about the kind of relationship, and we know that there's an important relationship that the school has with clinical sites. We don't want to lose those clinical sites. In most programs, they're voluntary. They have freedom to say, nope, I don't want any students. Not all by any means, but we need to maintain those relationships. The school wants to maintain those relationships with the clinical site. So with that in mind, I wonder, what are some ways that you've perhaps worked with those clinical coordinators around disclosure, communicating with clinical sites about access needs or accommodations, and some of the nuances within that?
We've got someone with the raised hand, so just hang on one second. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Hi, Laura, I think you make a great point, that frustration. I've gotten that from faculty before, like, oh, I just wish they would have, said something earlier. Well, I get that, but you can apply for accommodations at any point throughout your educational experience. And I think people forget that sometimes we also have students who are just learning about a diagnosis while they're in these health science programs. We have to take that into account. But for me, again, it's something I've learned over time, was how best to communicate with the faculty. And now I'm watering the plants, I apologize, that's how it was to get in touch with the right liaisons for all the different clinical areas. And once I expressed to my individuals at the university, I realized this is an important contract to have, and having a placement is so crucial. And having this, to be allowed to have a placement every year after this. So to ensure that we have the equal access, to ensure we have open communication, get me in touch with the right people, and what questions can I answer, and then what can we do to plan in the future. And I know at my institution, something I just started this year was getting together a program where I found we just had a real big surge and an increase of clinical accommodation needs. And the practicum faculty were kind of scrambling, going, okay, we know what to do. How do we convey this to the preceptors who are not faculty and just don't get it? I said, okay, well then let's find a time on the calendar where I can get everyone on the same page and kind of do a case management call and say, okay, we have 5 students rotating up to this placement next semester. We have these following accommodations. What questions or concerns, or what thoughts? You just really letting them have the space. And it was great. I just tried that at the end of July, and it's kind of in progress to set up for our fall semester. And what a great conversation I was able to have. And now I'm doing that with other programs as well. I kind of wanted to try it out first with one of my college programs. And now to say, okay, we have more and more need for this. This is a really great outcome. How can we keep this communication going? Because now I'm getting in touch with more and more people on the hospital side than I ever have before. And even the external placement sites, because at Rush, our students go not just all over Chicago. We have students who are remote across the country in different programs. So being able to reach out to those individuals as well early enough to say, we have a student rotating up in the next semester. We wanted to engage you with a conversation now to let you know about this. Can we set a time to talk? And it's great that my clinical faculty get the conversation going and introduce me, because again, my name may not go noticed by that individual at another institution, but the person who places students with them, every year, that's a common name for them. They would pick up that email. So it's just these little tips and tricks that I found that are just becoming so successful for me. And I hope it works for others.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I agree with some of the things that Marie has said. I think that kind of proactive approach can be really useful. One thing that we talk about in the book, and that I think is really important in this space, is kind of trying different ways to get ahead of an acute situation, so to speak, where you maybe put a statement in your agreements with all your clinical sites about the need to ensure equity and that there might be an expectation to provide accommodations. And then I think on top of that, having those kinds of pre-conversations with sites around what that might look like, ideally before they have a student who has access needs at the site. But I think there's kind of two ways to tackle this, that proactive approach and then the responsive approach. I don't know, Laura, have you had situations where you've worked with clinical placement coordinators around this?
Yeah, a little bit. So I have had the opportunity with some of our healthcare programs, sometimes just to have a conversation one-on-one or with a group of folks, whether it's assistant deans or people who work together to support students in a program, and to really talk about, okay, how are we going to communicate this with our clinical sites, and how can we perhaps reframe the way that they might think about it. So too often it's, oh my goodness, this is a burden. I need to do something different. I've always done things this way, and now I have to learn. And thinking about, okay, so we know that diversity is really helpful and important in learning and clinical settings. And so when we're thinking about disability as being part of this broader conversation, the JEDI, the Justice, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion conversation, and this is exciting. We have the opportunity to maybe do things a little bit differently, and to reframe the way that we think about disability as diversity, not deficit. And then also working with our clinical coordinators around making sure people feel resourced and prepared. Because we do acknowledge that, yes, if you've always done something one way and now you're maybe going to do things a different way, that does take some resourcing or some learning, and really emphasizing that needs to be an institutionally supported bit of learning or change and resourcing. It isn't always. And so we're living in this not quite yet there situation where the broader institutional structures of the healthcare system and the educational system don't necessarily support clinical educators in the way that we'd like them to. But we are working within this system while we're also working to change it.
Yeah, I think that's a great point to end on. And I love that idea of changing the narrative, reframing that narrative, and really talking about it as an opportunity to expand diversity and to enact justice in spaces, and also making the space for that learning and support to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Well, I think that's all the time we have today for moving through the questions. If you have not already visited the book club website at bit.ly/theguidebookclub, that's where you can find all the information about upcoming sessions, registration, questions, and facilitators. So we invite you to check out that website. And also, if you haven't yet purchased the book, there's a 25% discount if you go to springerpub.com/meeks and use the code bookclub25, all caps. And if you'd like to make a bulk purchase, you can contact Lee Montville at lmontville@springerpub.com, and that's for more than 10 copies. And we do have probably not any time for questions, but I'm happy to stay on if there's any really burning questions that people have. I don't know what your timeline is, Laura.
I can stay for a few more minutes of conversation.
we just have one question here in the chat about, let's see, do you have any suggestions on resources available to medical students for more personalized assistance on how to navigate the processes and improve communication between students and their respective institution? I mean, thank you for that question, Sue. I would say, and not to, I mean, we're here talking about the book. The book is a really good resource. And in that book, we haven't mentioned that there are 2 appendices to this chapter. One is models to work with students about communication. And then a new chapter in this edition, or a new appendix in this edition, is about communicating faculty communications. So there's a lot of really good models on communication there, and just more generally about processes and upskilling on processes. That's what this book is all about. And you might also encourage your folks from your school to join the coalition. That's an ongoing and dynamic community where folks can share their questions, learn from each other. That's what the coalition is all about. And there's also a lot of free resources on the coalition's website, which is hsmcoalition.org, I believe. I'll just put it in the chat. Do you have other ideas, Laura?
Oh, so those are good ideas for sure. I think also connecting with other folks.
Yeah.
So that can be on different social media platforms. That can be student groups at various schools. I'm part of a group called the AHA Moments. Actually, Dr. Neera Jain is coming on Sunday to our AHA moment. And that is really a community space of disabled folks and our allies. So some of those community spaces and relationships, I think, can also be really helpful in navigating and making your way through. Yeah, for sure. And if
Laura,
you'd like, oh yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if folks want to join AHA Moment, is there a process or a link that we can share?
I'm trying to find the link, but now I'll just put my email address in the chat, and then you can just email me if I don't get it before you leave. But I do have the link. I just need to go to another page to find it.
I guess, are there any final questions as we wrap up? Because I imagine folks that ahead, probably, and our transcriptionist are only booked for an hour. So just want to make sure we're mindful of time. But if there's any last questions, you can pop it in the chat or the Q&A. I don't see any more questions. All right, then. Well, we've got some resources on the last page that might also be helpful for you, Sue, to the AAMC webinars that bring some of these ideas to life. The UCSF faculty training videos, which are short videos that can be used with faculty and administrators on training around process. And of course, the Docs with Disabilities podcast, which is a fantastic podcast that Dr. Meeks and Dr. Poulos co-host, where they talk to disabled health practitioners, as well as folks doing research and advocacy in this space. So I think with that, we can end the session for today. Thanks so much, everyone. Thanks, Sue, for the shout out about my episode. And if you haven't yet heard Laura's episode, it's really fantastic. I had a nice morning listening to that on my commute. And the latest episode with Bliss Temple is really fantastic. So I encourage you all to listen. Fantastic. Well, thank you all. It's been a wonderful Saturday morning with you, and I hope you enjoyed.
Yes, thank you.